The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of Le Chateau Doré, and every head in the room turned toward Sophia Bennett. "You actually thought I'd bring you here?" Bradley Coleman's voice cut through the soft jazz drifting from the corner trio. "My friends bet me $50 I wouldn't show up with you. Did you really think a guy like me goes for a girl like you?" Sophia's face burned, but she set down her water glass without a tremor. 3 tables of Manhattan's finest pretending not to stare. "You should walk away before you say something you'll regret in front of witnesses." Bradley laughed. "Witnesses? Nobody in this room is going to remember you tomorrow." He was wrong. Someone would remember. Someone already had. From a private alcove behind a wall of frosted glass, Damian Cross watched with the stillness of a man who had spent 15 years training his face to give nothing away. His fingers tightened around a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. He had arranged this dinner. Through a discreet matchmaking service reserved for men who couldn't risk their names on a dating app, Damian had asked for one thing only: find the woman whose voice he'd heard 18 months ago on a recording that saved his life. The translator, who had flagged 3 sentences of Sicilian dialect buried in a shipping manifest. 3 sentences that told him his own cousin was walking him into an ambush. He'd never seen her face. The service kept it anonymous, at her request. He knew only a name: Sophia Bennett. He had not expected the man across from her tonight to be someone else entirely. Bradley Coleman, a hedge fund associate with a taste for cruelty, dressed up as charm, had intercepted the reservation as a prank, and Damian was only now piecing that together in real time. "I paid for this table," Bradley continued, oblivious to the man rising from the shadowed booth across the room. "I get to decide when this is over. This is over." Sophia stood, using every inch of her 5'7", chin level, the deep emerald of her dress catching the low light. "You're right about one thing. This is over." She reached for her clutch. Bradley grabbed her wrist. "I'm not done talking to you." The room went quiet, in a different way now. The kind of quiet that happens when danger walks into a space, wearing a $3,000 suit. Damian didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Let go of her. 2 words. The temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. Bradley's grip loosened out of pure reflex, before his brain caught up with what his body already understood. Sophia turned, and for the first time all evening, something other than anger crossed her face. Confusion. She recognized the effect this stranger was having on the room. The maitre d' going pale. 2 men at the bar quietly setting down their drinks. But she didn't recognize him. "I don't need rescuing," she said, before he'd even reached the table. "I know." Something in his tone made clear this wasn't chivalry. It was inventory being taken. "But he put his hands on you in my restaurant, and that's not a mistake I let people walk away from twice." The words, "my restaurant," hit Bradley like a physical blow. Color drained from his face, as he understood exactly whose orbit he'd wandered into believing himself untouchable. "Mr. Cross, I didn't realize." "No," Damian said. "You didn't." He didn't touch Bradley. He looked at the maitre d', who appeared instantly at his side, and said 4 words that would end Bradley Coleman's career in this city faster than any lawsuit. He's no longer welcome. Security materialized, quiet and efficient, and within 90 seconds, Bradley was gone, his coat left behind, his dignity abandoned on the marble floor beside the shattered flute. Sophia stood in the sudden vacuum, aware that every eye had shifted from her humiliation to her rescue, which somehow felt worse. She hated being watched either way. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "I know." He studied her with an intensity that made her want to fold her arms across her chest. She refused to give him the satisfaction. "Sophia Bennett." Her spine straightened. "How do you know my name?" It was the wrong moment to explain, and he knew it. "You had a reservation tonight, under a service I have some involvement with." I came to make sure the evening went smoothly. It wasn't a lie. It also wasn't close to the whole truth, and something in her expression told him she knew it. Well, she said, gathering the last of her composure like armor, your evening went about as smoothly as a car crash. Let's call it a night. She moved to leave. Damien let her get 3 steps before he spoke again. The car outside is mine. It's raining. Let my driver take you home, and you never have to see me again, if that's what you want. Sophia paused at the edge of the room, rain drumming against the tall windows, and turned back to look at him properly for the first time. This stranger with a voice like poured stone and eyes that missed nothing. Why would you do that? Because 18 months ago, a voice on a recording he'd never forgotten had saved his life, and something about the woman standing unbowed after being humiliated in front of 40 strangers made him wonder, for the first time in a long time, whether the universe occasionally kept its promises. Because I don't like watching people get treated the way you were treated tonight, he said instead, giving her nothing yet. Consider it a professional courtesy. She studied him a long moment, weighing the offer against every instinct, telling her to walk into the storm alone, rather than owe anything to a man who owned rooms the way other people owned furniture. Fine, she finally said, but I'm sitting in the back, and we're not talking. A ghost of something moved across Damien's mouth, not quite a smile, close enough to unsettle the 2 men at the bar, who had known him 15 years, and never once seen it before. Understood, he said. Neither of them knew yet that this rain-soaked ride down Fifth Avenue was the first thread in a story that would unravel a criminal empire, expose a woman's decades-old betrayal, and force a man who trusted no one to finally choose, for the first time in his life, to be known. The car ride was silent, exactly as Sophia had demanded, but silence with Damien Cross turned out to be its own kind of conversation. She spent the 20 minutes down Fifth Avenue, watching the city blur past the window, stealing glances at his reflection in the glass, trying to reconcile the man who'd ended a stranger's career with 4 quiet words, and the man now giving her exactly the space she'd asked for. When the car stopped outside her building in Murray Hill, a modest 5th-floor walk-up that couldn't have looked more different from wherever he lived, Sophia reached for the door handle before the driver could. "Thank you for the ride," she said, formal, final. "You don't need to see me again." "I know what you said." No argument in his voice, only a strange, careful patience. "Good night, Miss Bennett." She was 3 steps into the lobby before she realized he'd used her last name, a name she hadn't given him herself. She filed the detail away and told herself it didn't matter. It mattered 4 days later, when a courier arrived at the translation firm where she consulted, carrying a sealed envelope with no return address. Cross Global Logistics requires a translator for a closed-door meeting. Triple standard rate. Confidentiality agreement enclosed. Her supervisor, Harold Whitfield, practically vibrated. Cross Global doesn't hire outside firms. Ever. If they're asking for you by name, Sophia, this could set us up for the year. By name, Sophia repeated slowly, something cold settling in her stomach. She should have said no. Every instinct told her a job appearing 4 days after a humiliating dinner and an even more humiliating rescue wasn't coincidence. But the fee was real. Her rent was due, and some stubborn part of her refused to let Damien Cross believe she was the kind of woman who ran from a room just because he stood in it. She signed. The meeting took place on the 31st floor of a glass tower on Park Avenue, a floor with no company directory, requiring a keycard Sophia didn't have. Damien was already seated at the head of a long table, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize, and one she did, an older Sicilian gentleman whose eyes tracked her with unsettling precision. "Miss Bennett," Damien said, offering nothing more than a professional nod, as though 4 nights ago never happened. "This is Vittorio Andolini. He represents a shipping consortium out of Palermo. We need this contract translated line by line, before anyone signs. Sophia opened the document and felt the familiar click of focus settle over her. 30 pages in, translating a clause about Port Authority liability, she caught it. A discrepancy buried in paragraph 42, where the English draft promised exclusive distribution rights, and the original Italian actually granted the consortium the right to renegotiate after 18 months. She stopped reading aloud. "Something wrong?" Damien asked, missing nothing. "This clause doesn't say what the English claims. The Italian gives your partner an exit option after 18 months. If you sign this as written, you're agreeing to terms that don't match what you think you're agreeing to." Vittorio's jaw tightened, a flicker most people would have missed. "A translation error," he said smoothly. Too smoothly. Easily corrected. "It's not an error," Sophia said. "It's deliberate. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing." Something behind Damien's eyes recalibrated. A man quietly rewriting his assessment of everyone at the table, including her. "Vittorio," he said, voice level. "We'll need to revisit these terms." The meeting ended 20 minutes later, with no signatures, and a visibly furious Vittorio excusing himself. When the room cleared, Damien remained seated, studying her. "You caught in 10 minutes what my in-house team missed for 3 weeks. They probably weren't looking for it. I wasn't invited here to make friends, Mr. Cross. I read words accurately. That's what I do." "Is it always this dangerous? Reading words accurately?" Something flickered across her face, gone as fast as it came. But Damien had spent his life reading what people tried to hide, and he saw it. "Sometimes words are the only weapon some of us are allowed to carry." She left without waiting for his response. Damien sat alone in the empty room afterward, turning her sentence over in his mind like a coin he couldn't stop flipping. He didn't yet know that Vittorio had left that meeting and made a single call from the elevator to a woman in a penthouse 11 blocks away who had been watching Damien's every move for 4 days. A woman whose engagement ring he'd returned 2 years ago after learning what she'd cost his family. A woman about to discover the curvy translator in the emerald dress had walked directly into a war she didn't know existed. Elena Marchetti listened to Vittorio's report with a smile that never reached her eyes, turning the stem of her wine glass slowly between 2 fingers. "Sophia Bennett," she repeated softly, savoring the name like something she intended to ruin. A translator. How quaint. How convenient, too, that a woman with no family and no one watching her back just handed Damien a reason to trust her. She set the glass down without a sound. "Find out everything, Vittorio. Where she lives, who she talks to, what she's hiding. Every woman is hiding something. I intend to know exactly what she means to him before he does." Vittorio hesitated, something uncharacteristic in his voice. "And if there's nothing to find?" "There's always something to find," Elena said, rising from her chair, moonlight catching the diamond still resting, out of habit, against her collarbone, though the engagement had ended 2 years ago. "Let's find out exactly who you are, sweetheart, and exactly what you mean to him." Elena Marchetti did not do her own dirty work. That had always been the elegance of her cruelty. Destroying a person without lifting a manicured finger, simply by knowing which threads to pull, and which desperate men would pull them for her. Within 48 hours, a file landed on her desk, containing everything an investigator could dig up on Sophia Bennett. Freelance translator, fluent in Italian, Russian, Sicilian dialect, no family in the city. A deceased grandmother, Rosa Bennett, who had once worked as a housekeeper and occasional interpreter for 3 prominent East Coast families before quietly disappearing from public record in 1998. Elena read that line twice. Rosa Bennett. Now, why does that name feel familiar? It should have. Rosa hadn't simply been a housekeeper. She'd been the quiet, invisible woman in the corner of rooms where fortunes were negotiated and betrayals planned. trusted precisely because no one thought to be careful around her. She spent her final years carrying secrets 3 crime families would have killed to bury. Sophia didn't know the full weight of what her grandmother had witnessed. She only knew the woman who raised her had died with a locked box under her bed, and a warning she'd never fully explained. Some doors, once you look behind them, you can't close again. Sophia thought about that warning 3 days later, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Miss Bennett. Marcus Webb, head of security for Cross Global. Mr. Cross requires your services again. Today. There's a time-sensitive matter. She should have said no, but the fee mentioned made her rent problem disappear for 2 months, and some part of her wanted to see him again. The address wasn't the glass tower on Park Avenue. It was a dockside warehouse in Red Hook, the kind of location that made every instinct in her body sit up straight. Damien was waiting, dressed down into a dark jacket that made him look, if possible, more dangerous. Marcus Webb stood beside him, along with 2 men she didn't recognize, guarding a shipping container forced open before her arrival. "We intercepted a shipment," Damien said without preamble, gesturing at documents on a makeshift table. "Everything's in Russian. My translator's out sick. I need to know what we're looking at before I make a decision that can't be undone." Sophia scanned the documents and her stomach dropped. Not cargo. A weapons inventory. Coded but not coded well enough. Quantities and delivery routes laid out with terrifying precision. "This isn't a shipping manifest," she said quietly. "It's an arms shipment, and based on the routing codes, it's not supposed to be here. It's rerouted through a shell company called Meridian Freight." Damien's jaw tightened. Marcus swore under his breath. "Meridian Freight is one of Vittorio Andolini's holding companies," Damien said, more to himself than to her. "There's something else." Sophia's finger traced the second page, her instinct assembling the pieces with the same clarity that had once saved a stranger's life through a hotel recording 18 months ago. A name, cross-referenced with a payment schedule. E. Marchetti. The temperature in the warehouse dropped. "Say that again," Damien said, his voice gone quiet, controlled. The calm Sophia was beginning to recognize as the moment before something devastating. E. Marchetti, listed as secondary contact for payment confirmation. Damien didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, it was to Marcus, flat with a fury he was working hard to contain. "Pull every transaction Elena's touched in 6 months. I don't care whose name is on it or how buried it is." Sophia watched something shift in his eyes, an old wound reopening, and understood without being told that whoever Elena was, she mattered to him in a way that went beyond business. "You should go," Damien said abruptly, turning to face her. "This isn't safe for you. You called me here. I read what you asked me to read. If you wanted someone who'd flinch and walk away the moment things got complicated, you hired the wrong translator." Something in his expression cracked, admiration bleeding through the controlled fury. "You have no idea what you just walked into." "Then tell me," Sophia said, "or stop pretending you can keep me in the dark while asking me to decode the exact things you're hiding from me." For a moment, standing in that dim warehouse with weapons crates around them, Damien looked at Sophia the way a man looks at someone he's beginning, against every instinct of self-preservation he's spent his life cultivating, to trust. "Elena Marchetti was engaged to me 2 years ago," he said finally. "She sold information to a rival family that got my younger brother killed. I ended it the moment I found out, and I thought I'd buried every connection she had to my organization." His eyes moved to the documents in her hands. "Apparently, I was wrong." Sophia absorbed this in silence, understanding the shape of the war she'd walked into. "There's a second name," she said quietly, turning the document toward him. Smaller, almost hidden in the margin. Damien leaned in, and together, They read the name that would detonate everything Sophia thought she understood about her own family's buried history. R. Bennett, historical consultant, deceased. Sophia's breath caught. That's my grandmother's name. Across the warehouse, unnoticed by either of them, one of Marcus's security men lowered his phone after sending a single text to a contact he'd been quietly reporting to for 8 months. A contact who paid considerably better than Damien Cross did, and who had just been told exactly where Sophia Bennett would be standing for the next 30 minutes. The first shot shattered the loading door glass 6 inches from Sophia's head. Damien moved, before conscious thought caught up with instinct, pulling her down behind a stack of crates, as a second shot ricocheted off steel above them. Marcus was already shouting orders, his men fanning toward the northern exit, where the muzzle flash had come from. But Damien didn't move from where he'd pressed Sophia against the cold concrete, one hand flat against her back. "Stay down," he said, low and controlled, despite the chaos. "I'm not exactly planning on standing up and waving," Sophia managed, her heart hammering, adrenaline sharpening her voice. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it started, shouting outside, an engine gunning to life. Marcus reappeared, breathing hard. Shooter got away. Professional. Knew exactly where to aim. His eyes flicked to Damien, still crouched over Sophia. "Boss, that wasn't a warning shot at the warehouse. That was aimed at her." Silence followed, heavier than the gunfire. A young paramedic knelt beside Sophia, moments later, checking her pulse, with more attention than the situation strictly required. His hand, lingering on her wrist, a beat longer than necessary. "You're safe now," he said, offering a smile clearly meant to be reassuring. "I can ride with you to the hospital, just to be sure." "She's not going anywhere without me," Damien said, stepping between them before Sophia could answer, his voice carrying none of the warmth it had held moments earlier, when it was only the two of them behind the crates. The paramedic glanced up, read something in Damien's expression, and backed off without another word. Sophia raised an eyebrow at him once the man was gone. That was unnecessary. "Probably," Damien said, not quite meeting her eyes, something tight in his jaw that hadn't been there during the actual gunfire. He didn't explain further, and Sophia found she didn't need him to. Damien helped Sophia up, and for a moment neither spoke, the adrenaline still crackling between them. His hand lingered at her elbow a beat too long before he stepped back, reasserting the distance he usually kept. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words seemed to cost him. "I should never have called you here. You didn't shoot at me, Damien." First time she'd used his first name, and they both noticed. Whoever did, knew I'd be here before I did. That means someone close to you told them. His expression hardened. "I know." He drove her home himself, dismissing his driver. The two of them alone in the back of the car again. Except this time, the silence was exhausted, honest, stripped of the performances they usually wore. "You went very still back there," Sophia said quietly, "when Marcus said the shot was meant for me. I've never seen anyone go that still. That's the version of me that used to run this city on fear alone," Damien said, not quite looking at her. "I don't like what almost happened tonight. I don't like how much I don't like it." "Why does it matter to you?" Sophia asked, watching city lights slide past. "I've known you 2 weeks. I'm a translator you hired twice. You don't owe me protection." Damien was quiet long enough she thought he wouldn't answer. 18 months ago, someone flagged 3 sentences in a shipping document that saved my life. Sicilian dialect that told me my cousin was walking me into an ambush. I never found out who caught it. The service kept her identity anonymous, at her own request. He turned to face her. "I requested you specifically 4 weeks ago, hoping to finally meet the woman who saved my life, without either of us saying it out loud. I just didn't expect an idiot named Bradley Coleman to hijack my own reservation." The pieces slid into place with a force that left Sophia briefly unable to speak. None of it had been coincidence. "You could have just told me," she said, gratitude tangled with something close to hurt, "instead of watching me get humiliated before you decided the moment was right." "I didn't plan for Bradley," Damien said, real regret bleeding through his usual control. "I was going to introduce myself properly, order wine, thank you the way I'd rehearsed a dozen times. Instead, I watched a stranger treat you like something to be discarded, and every plan I had went out the window." Sophia looked at him a long moment, torn between protecting her heart and the pull of a man who had just offered more honesty in one car ride than most people offered in months. "I need time," she finally said, as the car stopped outside her building, "to process what almost happened tonight, and what you just told me." "Take whatever time you need," Damien said, and meant it, though it clearly cost him. 3 days into that time, deliberately not answering his calls, Elena Marchetti arrived at Sophia's door, uninvited, dressed in effortless couture that made Sophia acutely aware of every seam in her own department store blazer. Sophia Bennett. Elena smiled with a warmth that didn't touch her eyes. "I thought we should talk, woman to woman, before this goes any further." "I don't know you," Sophia said, though something cold was already crawling up her spine. "But you know Damien." Elena stepped past her, uninvited, cataloging every modest detail with poorly concealed disdain. "I was engaged to him for 3 years. I know exactly how this works. He finds someone useful, someone he feels indebted to, and confuses gratitude for feeling. It's not real, sweetheart. It never lasts. And when he's done using you, I'll still be the only woman who's ever truly understood what he needs." "If that's true," Sophia said, refusing to let her voice shake, "you have nothing to worry about from me." Elena's smile sharpened. "You're right, I don't. Because by the time I'm finished, he'll believe you were working with Vittorio Andolini this entire time, that the shooting was staged, that you're the leak he's been hunting. And Damien Cross does not forgive people he believes have betrayed him. Ask his brother's memory how that worked out." She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, the door clicking shut with theatrical precision, leaving Sophia alone, with her pulse racing, and a devastating realization settling over her like ice water. Someone was about to make it look like she had betrayed the one man who had finally, after 2 weeks of careful walls, started letting her in. The evidence appeared 4 days later, leaked to Marcus Webb through an anonymous tip that arrived with the same surgical precision Elena had promised. A financial transfer, routed through 3 shell accounts, landing in a savings account under the name Sophia R. Bennett. $40,000, dated the same day as the warehouse shooting. Alongside it, a doctored text exchange, screenshots appearing to show Sophia confirming a meeting location to a contact saved only as VA. Damien called an emergency meeting, and Sophia arrived without knowing why, still operating under the assumption that 4 days of silence had been a mutual, respectful pause. She understood the moment she walked in and saw Marcus's face, saw the documents laid across the table, saw the way every man in the room looked at her, like something dangerous had just walked in wearing her skin. "Explain this," Damien said, sliding the papers toward her, his voice stripped of every ounce of warmth from the back of that car 4 nights ago. Sophia scanned the documents and the floor seemed to tilt. "This is fabricated. I've never seen this account. I don't know who Vittorio's contact is. I've never texted anyone with those initials." "The account has your social security number attached," Marcus said quietly, not unkindly, but firm. "We verified it this morning. Then someone stole my information," Sophia said, her voice climbing despite her effort to stay controlled. "Damien, look at me. You've watched me catch discrepancies other translators missed, because I read every line like it might be lying to me. Do you really think I'd be sloppy enough to leave a trail this obvious if I'd actually betrayed you. For one suspended moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt, or hope, or the desperate wish that she was telling the truth. Then his expression closed like a door slamming shut, years of self-preservation overriding whatever softness had been growing there. "I want to believe you," he said, and the honesty of that admission hurt worse than an accusation would have. "But I built an empire by trusting evidence over feelings. My brother is dead because I trusted a feeling once. I won't make that mistake again." Something inside Sophia went very still, very cold, the particular quiet that comes right before a person decides not to break in front of an audience. "Then I guess you've already made your decision," she said. She didn't cry. She didn't plead her case, didn't grab his sleeve or beg him to remember the warehouse floor. His body curved over hers while bullets tore through steel. She gathered her bag with steady hands, met his eyes one final time, and let him see exactly what his choice was costing. Not through tears, but through the particular dignity of someone refusing to shrink. "For what it's worth," she said at the door, "my grandmother used to tell me that the people who scream loudest about loyalty are usually the ones who understand it least. I hope you figure out which one you are before it's too late." She walked out. Marcus watched his boss stand frozen at the head of that table for nearly a full minute after the elevator doors closed, staring at documents that suddenly looked less like proof and more like a question he hadn't let himself ask. 11 blocks away, Elena Marchetti received the news over a glass of Sancerre, with the satisfaction of a woman watching a carefully built house of cards collapse exactly as she'd designed it. "She's out," Vittorio confirmed. Cross had security escort her from the building. "No further contact permitted." "Perfect," Elena said, though her voice carried none of the warmth the word implied. "Now we move the actual shipment before he thinks clearly enough to notice we've been running 2 operations under his nose." What Elena had no way of knowing was that Sophia Bennett did not disappear into heartbroken obscurity, the way Elena assumed an ordinary woman would. Sophia went home, sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, and did the only thing she knew how to do when the world stopped making sense. She translated. She pulled up every document she'd touched during her time at Cross Global, cross-referencing dates and names with the same meticulous precision that had made her indispensable in the first place. Around 2 in the morning, buried in the margin notes of the very warehouse shipment that had nearly gotten her killed, she found it. A payment authorization, dated 3 weeks before she'd ever met Damian Cross, long before the shooting, long before any account could have been fabricated in her name. A wire transfer, $12,000, sent to a numbered account, authorized under a signature Sophia recognized instantly because she'd spent 2 weeks studying every document with Damian's letterhead. Marcus Webb's signature. Her hands went cold. Whoever had framed her hadn't acted alone. Someone inside Damian's own inner circle. Someone he trusted enough to hand him fabricated evidence without question, had been quietly moving money for Vittorio Andolini's operation for weeks. She thought about calling Damian immediately. She thought about it for almost a full minute, remembering the way he'd looked at her across that table, choosing evidence over feeling, choosing anything over trust in her. Instead, she opened her laptop and began composing a message to someone else entirely. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in 6 years. A contact buried deep in her grandmother's old address book that Sophia had always sworn she'd never need. "I need help. It's about the Cross family, and I think it's bigger than either of us realized." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. The reply arrived at 3:14 in the morning. 4 words that made Sophia's hands tremble around her phone. "I'll come to you." The man who knocked 40 minutes later was in his 70s, silver-haired, moving with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime being unseen, in rooms where power was traded like currency. He introduced himself simply as Nico, no last name, and Sophia recognized something in his eyes that reminded her, painfully, of the way her grandmother used to look, right before changing the subject. "You knew my grandmother," Sophia said, not a question. "I worked beside her for 11 years, Nico said, settling into the chair across her kitchen table. Rosa Bennett was the sharpest mind I ever met in this business. And this business chews up sharp minds fast. She kept records. Sophia. Insurance, she called it. Details on every family she ever worked for, every deal she witnessed, every lie she was asked to translate into something more palatable. She never used it. Not once. But she kept it, in case the day came when someone needed protecting more than she needed to stay hidden. Where is it now? Nico's expression grew careful. That depends on whether you're ready for what's in it. Because some of what your grandmother documented involves the Cross family directly. Specifically, the night Damien's brother died. Sophia went still. Tell me, your grandmother wasn't just a housekeeper for the Corsetti family before they anglicized the name, Nico said. She was present the night his younger brother, Matteo, was killed. She witnessed the ambush, and she recognized the man who leaked the meeting location to the rival family, because she'd seen him deliver documents to that same family for years, under a different arrangement. Marcus Webb, Sophia breathed. Nico's eyebrows rose. You already suspected. I found his signature on a payment authorization tonight. $12,000, 3 weeks before I ever met Damien. Sophia's mind raced, pieces sliding into place with terrifying speed. He's been working for Vittorio this whole time. Framing me solved 2 problems at once. It discredited me, and kept Damien from questioning who actually authorized that shipment reroute. There's more, Nico said, and something in his tone made her stomach drop further. Your grandmother's files include a recorded conversation, the night before Matteo Corsetti died, of Marcus Webb, confirming the ambush location to a woman he called only by a nickname. Rosa never learned her real identity, but the voice on that recording, Sophia, I've heard it since. Recently. It belongs to Elena Marchetti. The room seemed to tilt. Elena hadn't just betrayed Damien by selling information after their engagement ended. She had orchestrated the ambush that killed his brother years before that engagement ever began, threading herself into his life afterward as the grieving, comforting presence he desperately needed. She let him fall in love with her, Sophia whispered, after she'd already helped kill his brother. Your grandmother suspected as much, Nico said, closing the journal he'd been scanning. She recognized Elena's voice from a business dinner, months before the engagement was announced, but had no proof strong enough to bring forward without risking her own life. She hid the tape instead, hoping the truth would surface when it was safe. Sophia's phone buzzed against the floor, absurdly loud in the quiet unit. Unknown number. Don't answer that, Nico said sharply, but she'd already seen the message flash across her screen. We have your friend Nico's associate at the front gate. Come out now, alone, or Damien Cross discovers his brother's killer walked free because a curvy little translator got greedy for evidence to sell. 10 minutes. Sophia's blood ran cold. They're outside. Nico moved fast for a man his age, sweeping the journal, the recorder, and a handful of photographs into a canvas bag. There's a service exit through the loading dock, 2 units down. You go, now. Get this to Damien directly. No calls, no messages he can intercept or dismiss as more fabricated evidence. Put it in his hands yourself. What about you? I've survived worse men than Marcus Webb, Nico said, with a grim, tired smile. Go, Sophia. Your grandmother would want you to finish what she started. Sophia ran, the canvas bag clutched to her chest, through a narrow corridor that smelled of rust and dust, emerging into a side alley, just as raised voices echoed from the storage facility's main entrance behind her. She didn't look back. She hailed a cab 3 blocks away with shaking hands, gave the driver an address she'd memorized weeks ago, but never expected to use, and spent the ride rehearsing words that felt impossible to arrange. Night security recognized her immediately, which surprised her until she realized Damien must have left standing orders never to fully bar her entry. A small, contradictory mercy from a man who'd claimed to no longer trust her. She found him on the 31st floor, alone at nearly 5 in the morning, staring at a framed photograph of a younger man she assumed was Matteo, a glass of untouched scotch beside him. He looked up, and something raw and unguarded crossed his face before he could stop it. "Sophia, what are you doing here? It's not safe. Marcus Webb killed your brother," she said, cutting through whatever he'd been about to say. "He and Elena Marchetti planned the ambush together, years before your engagement. I have proof, a recording. My grandmother witnessed it and hid it, because she was afraid of exactly the men who are, right now, holding a man named Nico hostage at a storage facility in Queens, because he helped me find it." Damien rose slowly, disbelief and dawning horror moving across his face as Sophia set the bag down and pulled out the recorder with trembling hands. "Listen," she said. "Then decide if you still think I'm the one who betrayed you." Damien pressed play, and Marcus Webb's voice filled the quiet office, young, unmistakable, confirming a meeting moved to a warehouse on Conover Street. 10 o'clock, Matteo alone. Then a second voice, smooth and controlled. The same voice that had once whispered comfort into Damien's ear for 2 years, while he grieved. "Good boy, Marcus. Keep this up and there'll be plenty more where that came from. Damien will never suspect his own security chief." "And what about Damien? He's supposed to be there too. Let's hope for both our sakes he's running late that night." The tape clicked off. Sophia watched 15 years of carefully constructed control shatter across Damien's face. Grief and rage, and a devastating, retroactive understanding of every moment Elena had ever comforted him, rewriting itself into something monstrous. She let him fall in love with her after she'd already helped kill his brother, Sophia said quietly. The same words she'd said to Nico hours earlier, landing now like a verdict in the room. Damien said nothing for a long moment, staring at the recorder, like it might rewind 15 years, if he willed it hard enough. "Get Marcus on the phone," he finally said, voice gone dangerously quiet, reaching for his own phone with hands that weren't quite steady. Now. The call went to voicemail. A second call. A third. Each met with the same hollow silence, his expression darkening with terrible clarity. "He's running," Damien said, "which means Elena knows we're onto her too." Sophia's phone buzzed, the same unknown number from the storage facility. She answered on speaker. "Sophia, darling." Elena's voice purred through the line, honeyed and merciless. "I do hope you enjoyed playing detective. Unfortunately, your friend Nico won't be joining us for the rest of this story. And if Damien wants to see you again in one piece, he knows exactly where to find me. Alone. No security. 1 hour." The line went dead. Damien looked at Sophia with an expression that told her, with terrifying clarity, exactly how far he was willing to go to make sure Elena Marchetti never hurt anyone he cared about again. "You're not going alone," Sophia said, watching him pull a firearm from his desk drawer with the mechanical calm of a man who had done this before and hoped never to again. That's exactly what she wants. She's had years to plan this moment. You show up alone and furious, and you're walking directly into whatever trap she's built. "She has Nico," Damien said, not looking up. "I'm not risking his life on strategy, when I could just end this in an hour. You're not thinking. You're grieving." Sophia stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. I've spent my whole career reading what people don't say out loud. Elena didn't tell you to come alone because she's afraid of your security detail. She told you to come alone because she wants a confession or a mistake, something she can use. Don't give her either. For a long moment, Damien simply looked at her, the residual hurt of believing she'd betrayed him, tangled together with a fierce, unwilling gratitude that she was standing here anyway, fighting for him despite everything. "What do you suggest?" he finally asked. Marcus Webb. They would learn within the hour, hadn't made it far. His car was found abandoned near the Brooklyn Bridge approach, his phone still inside. A detail that told Damien's security team Elena had likely disposed of him the moment his usefulness expired, unwilling to leave a loose end who might turn informant. It was, Sophia realized with a chill, exactly the ruthless efficiency the recording had revealed Elena capable of years ago. The meeting location Elena specified was an old restaurant she and Damien had once frequented during their engagement, now shuttered, owned quietly through one of her shell companies. Sophia insisted on a wire concealed beneath Damien's collar, over his reluctance, and a van parked 3 floors below, with 2 of his most trusted men. "I'm surprised you came," Elena's voice crackled through the receiver as Damien entered. "Alone, exactly as instructed. Part of me thought you'd send men instead. Or her. Where's Nico?" Damien said, no warmth in his voice at all. "Alive, for now. That depends entirely on how reasonable you're willing to be." A pause, heels against old hardwood. "Do you know what it's like, Damien, to love someone for years and watch them fall for a woman who translates contracts for a living? A curvy little nobody who can't even afford a decent apartment. I built an empire's worth of leverage to keep you, and you handed your heart to her in 3 weeks. You didn't lose me to Sophia," Damien said, his voice hardening. "You lost me the night you had my brother killed. Everything since then has just been you, delaying the moment I found out." Silence stretched through the wire. Then Elena laughed, soft and brittle. "Clever girl, digging up Rosa Bennett's old ghost stories. I always wondered what happened to that recording. I should have had the old woman dealt with years ago, but Marcus insisted it was too risky." "You're confessing," Damien said quietly. "On tape. Congratulations, Elena. You just handed me everything I need." The barrier neither of them had spoken aloud, the one keeping them apart even now, hung unresolved between them. Elena still had Nico, still had leverage, and the war wasn't over yet. It was about to get far more dangerous before either of them got the chance to find out what came after. The chaos happened fast. Elena, realizing her mistake the moment the confession left her mouth, gave a sharp command to someone unseen, and the sound of a struggle crackled through the wire. A chair scraping, a door slamming. Damien's voice, urgent now, cutting through the static. "Nico, where is he?" Sophia was already moving before the van's driver could stop her, sprinting toward the restaurant's side entrance, with the 2 security men close behind, ignoring their shouted instructions to wait for backup. She burst through a service door into a dim, dust-covered dining room, just in time to see Vittorio Andolini dragging an elderly, bound Nico toward a rear exit, while Elena stood facing Damien across an overturned table, a small pistol leveled steadily at his chest. "Ah," Elena said, her composure cracking slightly at the sight of Sophia. "The reason for all this trouble, right on cue." "Let him go," Sophia said, nodding toward Nico, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is between you and Damien. He's an old man who kept a promise to a friend. He doesn't deserve to be part of your revenge." "Everyone becomes part of it eventually," Elena said, the pistol never wavering from Damien's chest. "That's the price of loving across. Ask Matteo." "Don't," Damien said, low and dangerous, taking one measured step forward, despite the gun trained on him. "This ends with you, Elena, not with anyone else." What happened next unfolded in seconds. Vittorio, distracted by the standoff, loosened his grip on Nico, just enough for the older man to drive an elbow into his ribs, breaking free. But Vittorio recovered fast, and the blade meant for Nico's back caught the old man's shoulder instead, as he twisted away. Nico went down hard against an overturned chair, blood already soaking through his shirt, and for one terrible second, Sophia's scream tangled with the second gunshot, this one real, fired by one of Damien's men, dropping Vittorio where he stood. Elena's attention flickered toward the commotion, a fraction of a second, and in that fraction, Damien moved, closing the distance and driving her gun arm upward as her own shot fired harmlessly into the ceiling, plaster raining down over all of them. The struggle that followed was brief and brutal. Damien's security men flooding through the front entrance moments later to subdue Vittorio, while Damien himself pinned Elena against the overturned table, stripping the weapon from her hand, with a violence that spoke of 15 years of buried grief, finally finding an outlet. "You don't get to kill me," Elena spat, breathless, pinned and furious. "You need me alive to explain to your organization why their leader let a woman fool him for 2 years." "No," Damien said, stepping back from her, his voice suddenly, terribly calm. "I need you alive because dead, you're a martyr." Alive, in a courtroom, in front of every family who ever trusted you. You're just a woman who got caught. Sophia watched the fight drain out of Elena's face, watched the realization land that her carefully constructed empire of manipulation had just been dismantled not by violence, but by the evidence and patience she'd always assumed a translator and a grieving old man could never assemble. Nico, pale and bleeding but conscious, gripped Sophia's hand as paramedics converged around him, sirens now wailing outside, Damien's people already working to control the scene before real police arrived. "Your grandmother," he managed, voice thin, "would be very proud of you tonight." Sophia looked across the wreckage of the old restaurant to where Damien stood over Elena, security restraining her, his shoulders finally beginning to loosen from years of carried tension. It should have felt like the end. It didn't, not entirely, because as red and blue lights swept across the shattered windows, one of Damien's men called out from the back office, his voice tight with alarm. "Boss, you need to see this." Tucked inside a hidden panel behind Elena's desk, they found a second set of ledgers, entirely separate from anything Vittorio had touched, documenting years of payments, not to rival families, but to 3 members of Damien's own organization, men Damien had trusted with his life, men who were, at this very moment, still walking free inside his empire, believing their betrayal remained buried, with Marcus Webb at the bottom of the East River. Elena, watching Damien's face as he read the names, allowed herself one final, brittle smile, even as security dragged her toward the door. "You think this ends with me," she said. "It doesn't. I was never the only one who wanted you weak, Damien. I was just the only one who loved you enough to do it slowly." The names on that ledger would take everything Damien and Sophia had just survived and multiply it, because the deepest betrayal of the entire war had never been Elena's alone to carry. As Damien's finger stopped on the third name, his face went the color of ash, and he turned to look at Sophia across the wrecked dining room with an expression she had never once seen on him. Not fear of a gun, not fear of Elena, but the specific terror of a man realizing the empire he'd spent 15 years protecting had rotted from the inside for far longer than he'd ever let himself imagine, and that the price of finally seeing it clearly might cost him everything he had left to lose, starting with the one person standing in that room he could no longer promise he'd be able to protect. The 3 names in the ledger belonged to men Sophia had shaken hands with in boardrooms, men who had nodded at her politely in hallways, while quietly bleeding Damien's organization dry alongside Elena for over a year. A second, smaller betrayal running parallel to the first, born not of Elena's manipulation, but of simple, old-fashioned greed. Damien recognized the handwriting on the final page before he even reached the signature. His own head of logistics, a man named Frank Delgado, who had worked beside him for 9 years. He didn't confront Delgado that night. He waited 3 days, let the man believe the danger had passed with Elena's arrest, and assembled every piece of proof, Sophia's grandmother's records, the ledger, and Frank's own financial trail could provide. Because Damien Cross had learned, finally, that acting on fury instead of evidence was exactly the mistake that had cost Sophia her dignity, once already, and he refused to make it again. The confrontation happened at Cross Global, in the same conference room where Damien had once accused Sophia of betrayal, and this time Sophia sat beside him at the table, not as a translator brought in to decode documents, but as the woman who had assembled the case laid out in front of Frank Delgado's pale, sweating face. "You've been selling shipment routes to Andolini's network for 14 months, Damien said, sliding the ledger across the table with the same cold precision he'd once used on Sophia. Except this time, the evidence was real, and the man across from him had no innocence to defend. Elena recruited you the same year she recruited Marcus. Your account shows the exact same shell structure." Frank's composure cracked instantly, desperation replacing the practiced calm of a man who had spent over a decade learning how to lie in this very building. "Damien, I can explain. You don't get to call me that anymore," Damien said quietly, and something in the stillness of his voice made 3 security men shift almost imperceptibly toward the door. "You're going to tell me everyone else involved, or you're going to spend the rest of this conversation wondering whether I'm still the man who lets people walk out of rooms alive." It was Sophia who spoke next, and her voice, calm and precise, cut through the room with the particular authority of someone who had spent her entire career being underestimated and had stopped caring what that cost her. "There's a 4th name we haven't confirmed yet, Frank. Someone who authorized wire transfers you weren't cleared to touch alone. I'd start talking, because right now you're the only one in this room who still has a choice about how the rest of your life goes." Frank talked. For nearly an hour, names and dates and account numbers spilled out of him in a flood of self-preservation, and by the end of it, the second network Elena had quietly cultivated inside Damien's empire lay exposed in its entirety. 3 men beyond Frank himself, all of them arrested within the week, on charges that would keep federal prosecutors occupied for years. Word of what had happened spread through the organization and the wider circles that orbited it, with the particular speed reserved for stories that involved humiliation, betrayal, and a woman nobody had taken seriously 6 months earlier. By the time Elena Marchetti's trial date was set, Sophia Bennett's name had become synonymous, in certain rooms across Manhattan, with the woman who had single-handedly dismantled 2 separate conspiracies, using nothing but a translator's eye for inconsistency and a grandmother's decades-old insurance policy. Elena, awaiting trial in a federal holding facility, received one final visit before Damien severed every remaining thread of contact between them. She looked smaller across the visitation glass than she ever had in any ballroom, stripped of the couture and the careful cruelty that had once made her formidable. "You could have just let me disappear," she said, studying him with something that might have been genuine curiosity. "Why come at all?" "Because I needed to see it for myself," Damien said, "the moment I stopped being afraid of you." He rose from the chair, unhurried. "You spent years convincing me that trust gets people killed. You were right, Elena. It got Matteo killed. It got Frank's career ended, and Nico nearly bled out on a restaurant floor. But you were wrong about the lesson. The answer was never to trust no one. It was to trust the right person." He didn't wait for her response. He walked out of that facility into late afternoon light, found Sophia waiting exactly where she'd promised she would be, leaning against his car with her arms crossed, and an expression that held no pity for Elena, and no illusions about what the last 6 months had cost either of them. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Lighter," Damien said, and meant it, surprised by his own honesty. "Like I finally put something down I've been carrying since I was 21 years old." Sophia studied him a long moment, the city noise of late afternoon Manhattan moving around them, and reached for his hand without announcement, without ceremony, simply because it felt, finally, like the correct and obvious thing to do. "Good," she said, "because I'm not interested in being anyone's replacement for a woman who almost destroyed you. I want you exactly as lighter as you just described, nothing less." Damien looked down at their joined hands, then at her, and something settled behind his eyes that had never been there before. Not fear, not calculation, not the careful architecture of a man protecting himself from the next betrayal, just certainty. "Then I suppose," he said, "we should figure out what comes next." The gala had been planned 6 weeks earlier, before any of this began. A fundraiser for a children's hospital that half of Manhattan's most powerful families would attend, including, Sophia now understood with a bitter irony, people who had watched Bradley Coleman humiliate her at Le Chateau Doré, without lifting a finger to stop it. Damien asked her to come, not as a translator, not as a favor, but as herself, and Sophia spent 3 days deciding whether she had the courage to walk back into a room full of people who had once watched her be discarded, like something unworthy of the table she sat at. She wore deep burgundy this time, not emerald, a small private rebellion against memory, and when she walked into the same grand ballroom where Elena Marchetti's arrest had already become the city's most whispered about scandal, she felt every eye shift toward her, this time carrying a different weight entirely. "That's her," a woman murmured near the bar. "The translator. They're saying she found evidence the FBI had been chasing for 3 years." Bradley Coleman stood at the edge of the room, clutching a drink, with the particular desperation of a man whose reputation had quietly collapsed, since word spread of exactly whose dinner he'd hijacked. He caught Sophia's eye, and had the good sense to look away first. "You came," Damien said, appearing beside her. The bruising along his jaw from the restaurant confrontation faded to a faint shadow. Something in his eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "I almost didn't. Standing in this room again feels like walking back into the scene of a crime." "Then let's rewrite it," Damien said, and offered his arm. They moved through the ballroom together, and Sophia watched, with quiet, private satisfaction, as conversations paused around them, as people who had once looked through her now looked at her, recalculating whatever assumptions they'd made about a curvy woman in a modest dress who apparently held the kind of quiet power that made hardened businessmen nervous. Near the end of the evening, on the terrace overlooking the East River, Damien finally said what Sophia suspected he'd been building toward all night. "I owe you an apology, not just for the conference room, for believing fabricated evidence over 18 months of watching you be exactly who you claim to be. I built my whole life on the principle that trust gets people killed. My father taught me that. My brother's death confirmed it. Then you walked in and made me question every rule I'd built to survive. You chose evidence over me," Sophia said quietly, not accusatory, simply honest. "That hurt more than I let myself admit." "I know," he turned to face her fully, "and I understand, if that's not something you forgive, just because the truth came out. But you were never wrong about yourself. Not that night at Le Chateau Doré. Not in that conference room. Not once. I was the one who needed to learn how to see clearly. You never stopped being exactly who you are." Something in Sophia's chest loosened, an old defense she'd carried since every room that had ever made her feel too much, and not enough at once. "My grandmother used to say, the people worth trusting are the ones who come back after they've been wrong. not the ones who never make mistakes. Then let me come back, Damien said, quiet and unguarded. Not because I feel indebted to you for saving my life twice, because somewhere in the last 6 months, watching you refuse to shrink, no matter how many rooms tried to make you smaller, I fell in love with you. Completely. In a way, I promised myself after Elena, I'd never let happen again. He reached into his jacket and produced not a ring box but a small, worn leather journal Sophia recognized instantly, her breath catching. Rosa Bennett's journal, restored, its binding whole again. I had it repaired, he said. I thought you should have her back, whole, the way she deserved to be remembered. Tears gathered that Sophia didn't bother fighting. Then Damien lowered himself onto one knee on the terrace stone, city lights scattering across the water behind him, and the ballroom crowd behind the glass doors fell into a hush, carrying something entirely different than the whispers of 6 months ago. Sophia Bennett, he said, his voice carrying nothing but unguarded devotion. I spent 15 years believing trust was a weakness men like me couldn't afford. You proved me wrong, in every way that mattered. I don't want an empire that keeps me safe and alone. I want a life, with you, if you'll have me. He opened a small box, the ring inside simple and elegant, chosen with the same careful precision he brought to everything that actually mattered to him. Yes, Sophia said, and the word carried across the terrace with a clarity that silenced whatever remained of the crowd's hushed anticipation. Yes, Damien. He rose and kissed her there, unhurried, certain, while behind the glass, the ballroom erupted into applause, neither of them fully registered. Later, near the terrace railing, Sophia found a quiet moment with Nico, his arm still in a sling, pride etched into every line of his weathered face. Your grandmother would have loved this, he said, nodding toward Damien, who stood nearby, speaking with Marcus Webb's replacement, about protocols that would never again let betrayal fester, unnoticed, inside his organization. She always told me, words were the only weapon some of us are allowed to carry, Sophia said, turning the ring on her finger, still unfamiliar, already precious. I think she'd be glad mine finally built something, instead of just protecting me from something. She looked out at the water, at the city lights that had once felt like judgment, and now felt like possibility, and thought of a curvy woman in an emerald dress, standing alone at a humiliating dinner table, unaware that across the room, a man who would become her whole future was already, quietly, watching, already understanding what everyone else in that room had failed to see. She had never needed rescuing. She had only ever needed someone willing to stand still long enough to actually look. And now, finally, someone had.